Okay, so I'm going to share the toolkit that we created in Micronesia, which is also called Adapting to a Changing Climate Toolkit. And I'm not going to go into too much detail because I think you guys, based on the discussions we had this morning, you guys already have a lot of information, but so I'm just going to share the process and a little bit of the content so you can see why and how we came up with this. So just a little bit about where I work. I'm the Conservation Program Manager at the Micronesia Conservation Trust. And so we're a NGO based in Pohnpei in the Federated States of Micronesia, and we work throughout the whole region of Micronesia, which includes the Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the Republic of Palau, Guam, and the Northern Marianas Islands. So our mission is to provide sustainable financing and support for biodiversity conservation, related sustainable development, and environmental education. And we do this through grant making and capacity building. We also do this, manage the Micronesia Challenge Endowment and also the funding mechanism for Micronesia Challenge. And I just wanted to point out something that was interesting that John brought up about how all those huge climate change funds money that is going to the government and not directly to communities. We are actually in the process of becoming a national implementing agency, so that we can make that happen in Micronesia. So currently we're just doing it for the Federated States of Micronesia, so that money can actually come to us and then we can re-grant it to the communities, which is what we usually do as opposed to it going to the government and getting it tied up there. As we know, climate change is becoming a bigger issue, and it's something, especially in islands, that we're feeling the impacts from. And so we saw that most of the climate change information is regional, national, or provincial scale, and it's not really for the community. There's not a lot of information about local impacts. It's not exactly understood, and some of this information is not available to the communities. And we found that there are very few community-based adaptation models when we started this process. So our original plan was to just take climate change and integrate it into the management planning process that we already use in the region. In Micronesia, we do a lot of work with protected areas, and we use a similar process throughout the whole region to develop management plans and community action plans. So we started off by holding a workshop in Micronesia, and we had community leaders and traditional leaders, community members, resource managers, climate experts, and they agreed that we should, they supported the creation of this tool, the management planning tool with climate change into it. But what they said is that we really needed outreach materials that target traditional leaders and community leaders so that they could have this knowledge about climate change so that they could lead adaptation work in their communities, and that there was also a need for culturally appropriate information. So what came out of this product was large flip charts graphically depicting climate change concepts. So as you can see up there, there's the flip charts. We also have booklets, and I brought some here for you guys to look at. Unfortunately, I can't give them away because I borrowed these from one of our communities. We have a flip chart guide, a facilitator's guide that provides detailed information. So it's probably more information than what you would usually cover in the community, but just so that gives the confidence to either the resource manager or a traditional leader who might be leading the thing. We also have a 30-minute video, which I brought some copies of, and that talks about climate change in the region and how it's going to affect Micronesia, but then it also highlighted adaptation projects that have already been done. And lastly, as I mentioned, we revised what we call the Impact Management Planning Guide to include climate change. So the purpose of the flip chart tool was to provide up-to-date climate change information to community leaders. What is climate change? Why should they care about it and get involved? What are potential impacts and how can they prepare? And like I mentioned, we wanted to motivate leaders to take action and be involved. We really wanted them to be leading the climate change adaptation activities in their communities and just to be getting support from the resource managers. So now I'm going to share with you the actual toolkit so you can see a little bit of what it looks like. So the way we did it is we started off by comparing a healthy and a threatened community. So we want communities to really think about the natural resources and also social resources they have in their community and the services they provide. And then to think about maybe some of the threats they might have in their community or could be happening in other communities that are around them that affect these services that the resources provide. In Micronesia, we have both high islands and low islands, like atolls, so we have both versions available. So this is a threatened low island and a healthy low island or atoll. And then what is climate change and what changes can we expect to see in the region? So we just wanted a very basic introduction to climate change for the community. We spend a lot of time in the trainings we do with resource managers and traditional leaders coming up with analogies on how can you explain climate change to the community. One popular one was the cars, when you leave the windows rolled up in your car, how it gets hot faster. But then we had the issue that a lot of islands don't have cars. So we started talking about how you might put a lid on a pot so to make the water boil faster. And then we move into what changes can we expect to see in the region. So what we did was we took these symbols, and you're going to see them over and over again. One that symbolizes sea level rise, sea surface temperature, air temperature, ocean acidity, and change in weather patterns. And you take these to explain to the community what they mean and how it will impact them. And so why should our community care? So first, on the far side, we have the potential impacts. We talk a lot about livelihood and food security and community health and safety. Another issue is traditional culture. A lot of as we're doing these outreaches in communities, a lot of the feasts in Micronesia are based on the fruiting of breadfruit and yam and other crops. And so they said that the dates of their feasts are actually starting to change, and that sometimes they can't even have the feast if the weather patterns have changed so much that the breadfruit didn't fruit that year. So we also bring up that issue. And then on this side, these are pictures already throughout Micronesia of some of the impacts we're already seeing from climate change. In 1998, from El Nino, we had a very big bleaching event in Palau, so that's that photo there. And then how will this affect our community? So we go back to our healthy community and now see those same symbols from before overlaid. So we go back to talking about a watershed and the services they provide. So what happens if we have increased potential for, and changes in weather patterns that would lead to increased potential for droughts or floods and landslides. And you can look at each of the different services that the resources provide and how these the impacts are affecting them. And then the next one, we look at the threatened community, and we talk about cumulative impacts. And the idea that, so if you've already cleared your watershed and you've got changes in weather patterns, you're having an even more increased chance for droughts or floods and landslides. And part of this is our main kind of overall theme is that a healthy community is a resilient community, whereas a threatened community is going to be less resilient. So that these are the things that the community can do. That they're actually, because a lot of times what we found when we're going to communities, they say, climate change is bigger than us. We're not causing it. There's nothing we can do. And so we want to show that there are some things they can do. And so these are a few of the what communities can do to make a difference. And these are 3 examples, 2 from Micronesia, and 1 is from Vanuatu, showing establishing a protected area so that the coral reefs can be healthier and hopefully more resilient to coral bleaching. Another was in the Republic of the Marshall Islands, dealing with the accelerated rate of coastal erosion and severe drought. And then in Vanuatu, this was actually another example of a community relocation because of a lack of fresh water. And so then the next one, and this is what we talked about earlier today, the vulnerability assessment. Before we can really do a vulnerability assessment, we want the communities to understand what exposed means versus, and less exposed, less sensitive, and higher adaptive capacity, more resilient, less vulnerable, versus more vulnerable and less resilient, and more exposed, more sensitive, and have lower adaptive capacity. So as you can see, for example, this community is more exposed because they've cut down their mangroves. And so they're more sensitive, and as a result, they are more sensitive to sea level rise. Once we've done outreach planning, the outreach in the community, if they're interested in climate change and they feel that this is something they want to start working on in their community, the next step is to do this adaptation or management and adaptation plan. So I'm not going to really talk about this too much because some of it was very similar to what John spoke about earlier, but I just wanted to show you guys some of the different tools we use. So we have to do the resource mapping that we mentioned. We do, before we get into climates, we do an assessing of non-climate threats, a historical timeline, and this has been really interesting. We talk about, so we have the communities remember all the way back when they dealt with things like typhoons, droughts, flooding, because we want them to start thinking about how did they deal with these things in the past? Are these tools that they can use in the future to deal with them as they become more extreme or more frequent? And the seasonal calendar, I think somebody also brought up. So we also do this activity as well. And we look at changes, not just like weather, but also tuna migration, grouper spawning, breadfruit season, bird migration. And so I have them do that, and then we have them make a list of all the changes that they're noticing. Are the breadfruit seasons still the same? Are there storms happening when they usually do? That sort of thing. And then lastly, this is our version of the vulnerability assessment. So we do it usually just focusing on one target resource at a time. We look at the current status of the target, the threats, climate hazards, exposure, sensitivity, impacts, adaptive capacity, and the vulnerability. Lastly, we rank that based on the others. So this tool was designed by Megan Gombo, Scott Atkinson, and Supin Wong-Ostrom. I don't know if anybody noticed, but the villages look very Fijian. They're not Micronesian, and that's one of the first things the Micronesians point out to us. And so that's because our illustrator was from Fiji, Several Juntor. But we've already been using the toolkit in Micronesia, but it's also starting to expand already. We've done some trainings in PNG and the Solomon Islands and have had interest from all over. PBS, the public broadcasting station in the US, is actually going to take the toolkit and make it interactive online so you can click on it. So, I don't know, questions now or?
Well, we're a little bit early, so if anyone has any questions for Liz right now.
Is that okay?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. That was really good. Interesting stuff in there. And it seems to me that a lot of sort of traditional stuff popping up, and it seems like you've really been able to take that on board and draw upon it with it. And I was just wondering what sort of things that the communities you're working with have come up with or volunteered for traditional responses in the past. You mentioned typhoons and whatnot in the past, or just historically, how have they coped with climate variability over the centuries that they've been living on the island? So has there been much sort of volunteer from their side how they've dealt with it?
Yeah. So we've just started using this in communities. We haven't finished all the training, so we've only been just starting to collect information. So there hasn't been a lot of traditional information coming out yet. We're hoping to be able to collect all of that, and then actually our next step is going to be to develop guidance materials that would be, so let's say you prioritize erosion as the threat you want to deal, impact you want to deal with, and then we were going to develop similar tools with how to choose the appropriate steps. And I do know that, for example, in Yap, they've had traditional seawalls that they built, and also they had a traditional way of clearing channels by where the rivers were coming out to make sure that the sediment was flowing out and not piling on the reef. So that's one way they dealt with the erosion and sedimentation in the past. So that's one thing that's come out. In the Marshall Islands, they've talked a lot about relying on other islands and migration, and so that's something that is going to be a reality. And then I think for again, for typhoons, there's also just making sure that they had food stores, you know, the fermented breadfruit and that sort of thing available in advance.
at training, doing training of trainers for community leaders?
Yeah, so that's what we're doing right now. So so far we've held trainings, and the trainings have included not just those who are doing resource managers, but traditional leaders. So we've had the chiefs of some of the villages that we're working with come and participate, so that when we go out and do the outreach, and a couple of communities in Pohnpei, for example, they've actually led the outreach part. So that has gone over really well.